So let me quickly introduce myself. So I'm Brito. I do comic art, and these are some of my artworks. Yep. So in this workshop, I'll be taking you through my process of how I actually create these characters. I'll, this character design process I've actually broken down into 4 steps, which is like lines. It starts with lines because basically, as an artist, you use lines to convey the message, right? You're using lines to define the 3D form and show the character. So it's important to understand how to use lines in a creative way. So what I've seen like many artists do, like who are just starting out, they're not so confident with their line work. They usually like draw a bunch of small lines which connect into a bigger one. But it is important for an artist to be confident with their line works and have a strong straight line work which you don't have to think about, because when you start thinking about lines it becomes like a impeding factor. So there's like a lot of exercise that you can do, like you can pick up a piece of paper and then practice drawing a bunch of horizontal lines, and over time you'll get to a stage that you're confident with your line work. Same you can do like vertical strokes and try doing like a lot of curves, and yeah, this will definitely help you. I'll share some of the artworks where artists use lines in a creative way. So I don't know if you guys know about this mangaka Yoshihiro Tagashi. He's the writer and creator of the anime and manga called Hunter x Hunter. So one thing interesting is that how he uses lines to convey energy and emotions. So in this specific scene, the character is Gon. His name is Gon, and he's in a type of situation where he's like extremely stressed, and he's showing his emotions by using a lot of vertical strokes of lines. You can see throughout the hair, under his eyes. And the thing about this artist is that he never uses this sort of rendering for any other purpose but to convey emotions into his characters. And you can also see in certain areas where he uses lines to define the form of his character's face. He has used lines to convey it. And I'll show you one more example. This is later in the manga where the character almost starts emitting energy out of him. And you can see how he has used lines, very rough lines in fact, to convey the amount of energy that is being emitted by this character. And you can also see the very rough rendering inside the character. So these are some awesome tips. Try to implement in your work. And it also creates a motion, like a feeling of something that is coming out of him. And it creates this nice shape that separates him from the background. So yeah, this was just one example. And the next one is from Jujutsu Kaisen. There's a certain point where our protagonist Itadori Yuji becomes almost overpowered, and the artist has used a similar trick to convey the amount of energy that is coming off of this character. But at the same time, you can definitely see the difference. And this is a scene from the anime, and I will show you the one from the manga. And the interesting thing in this is like how he has decided to keep more than half of his face black, like under the shadow. So it gives a lot of emphasis to his eye, and you see the emotion that he's trying to convey. So this is like a really cool example. You can also see this in a lot of animes. Like if you're seeing Attack on Titan, they show the characters who are older. They do a lot of cross hatching under the eyes of those characters. Even in shows like Mob Psycho. Okay, so now I'll talk about forms. Forms is actually like one of the most important things most artists would master. It comes down to like you understanding how to visualize three-dimensional objects. And I'd say the most important is you should be able to draw these objects in like any angle. Okay, there's a question. Is writing pad needed for making lines and animation or just mouse is enough? Okay, so to answer that question, if you're doing it digitally, of course you can't draw with mouse, right? It will be extremely difficult to draw with mouse. And I'd highly recommend you to like do research on graphic tablets. There are a lot of different brands like Huion and Wacom, and you can like look up on YouTube on which device will suit you best. Yeah, but if you're doing traditionally, you wouldn't require uh, a graphic tablet, but digitally you would definitely, and mouse won't be sufficient. Yeah, so I know that like most of you are doing things in Blender, right? Most of you are quite familiar with Blender. So one of the one fun activity you can do is like open up Blender and like uh, create the, don't delete the default cube. You usually delete the default cube. Um, then create add a lot of other shapes and then move your 3D camera around and like practice drawing those shapes from different camera angles, and that will definitely help you understand your 3D forms. And this is especially useful because like when you are drawing a character for 2D animation, you need to visualize your character in 3 dimension. You should be able to visualize how he would look from front, back, and side, and also 3/4 and everything. And yeah, it's also important for you to learn perspective. But yeah, in this video, I won't go too deep into perspective. I'll give you like a brief overview of it. But perspective is a huge thing, and there are plenty of resources you can find on YouTube. Just Google 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, and 3 point perspective. And yeah, just start watching through them and do a lot of studies. So I'll give you a quick overview of what 1 point perspective is. Basically, when you see any object that is closer to you, let's say a 2 dimensional square, and when you uh, bring it backward, it becomes smaller, right? That's just how things work. You see things that is closer to you larger and things that is further from you smaller. This is the idea that you use to draw things in perspective. So you can imagine a cube, just a cube as a 2D plane which is stretched in a certain direction. But as it goes further away from you, it will get smaller. So the concept that they use is this idea of this thing called the horizon, where you have a vanishing point and you imagine that the 2D plane is keeps shrinking. The further it goes, it keeps shrinking towards the vanishing point. You use that as a guide to draw the 3 dimensional form of the cube. And it doesn't have to be just for the cube, it can be for a cone, a cylinder. So if I give you an example for a cylinder, you'll start with a circle and you imagine it shrinking towards the vanishing point. And yeah, that's how you can visualize a cylinder in 1 point perspective. So this is just 1 point perspective, but when it comes to 2 point perspective, there will be two vanishing points. And in 3 point perspective, there will be three. And yeah, so on, so on and so forth. But yeah, like I said, this is quite a bit more complicated, and I would suggest you to like mm, search on YouTube, and you'll definitely get a lot of resources out there that will help you learn perspective. Yeah, next thing I would like to talk about is shapes and silhouettes. So one important thing that when it comes to 2D character design is how you design, how memorable it is. Usually, the most of the iconic characters that you're seeing, if you take out separate the silhouette of it, you would be able to quickly identify them. So I'll give you one example. So this is a silhouette of a character. I hope most of you can identify him. So the thing that makes Spider-Man so iconic is his pose. You don't need to see all the details of his mask or the webbing in his design. You quickly identify him because of his like unique pose. So I'll give you one more thing, one more character design. I'm sure you guys know this too. Yeah, most a lot of people are saying in the chat Tom and Jerry. Yep, you're right. It is Tom and Jerry. Yeah, so the cool thing about Tom and Jerry, it's a show that I used to watch a lot, and Tom has this interesting shape, which is so iconic, and like you can immediately understand that this is Tom just if you look at his ears, the whiskers. So yeah, these are some like shape designs that have been so iconic and memorable in our mind to such an extent that you don't even need to see how the character looks. You just need to see the silhouette and you quickly recognize those characters. Okay, I'll give you another one. So one cool thing about Pokemon is that if you've seen the show, just before the ad break, they would usually like give you a silhouette of a random Pokemon which appeared in that episode, and they'll ask you to guess what what's the name of the Pokemon. And then like once the advertisement is over, they'll like reveal the character. So this is also an interesting way how they have used great shape designs in their character to make it quite iconic. Okay, can someone guess this character? Yep, you're right. Ang from Avatar. So I feel like the thing that makes Avatar Ang so recognizable is like bald head and then the staff he's using. You can quickly identify that it's him. And yeah, this also comes down to how they've used the shape design in the character. Okay, so show you the final one. And this is from an anime, and I don't think most people have seen, but if you've seen it, I'm super happy because it's my favorite anime ever. It's Camina from Guren Lagann, and I really love this character design. So the reason this character design is so good is because they show you this character up until episode 8 of the show, and they never show him again until the very last episode. And when they introduce him in the very last episode, you don't see him as Kamina. You just see a silhouette of him, and you quickly know that it is him. And yeah, that's another cool thing about how good his character design is. And something to keep in mind is like there's a lot of pointy elements, sharp and pointy elements. And there's a lot of things you can talk about when it comes to psychology in shape design. And there are certain things that people say if you're using a lot of sharp elements in your character design, it usually tends to be more masculine. And if you're using a lot of curved and like organic shape, it tends to be more feminine. So you can also use these ideas. You can have these ideas in mind while designing your own character. Next thing I want to talk about is references. I feel like there's this thing between artists where most people don't use references. They tend to draw things from their imagination. But I feel like it's important to use references because if you just draw from your memory all the time, uh, you're not you start making a lot of mistakes because it's known that human memory isn't perfect. So obviously you'll make a lot of mistakes when it comes to uh, the anatomy or the perspective, all those things. So especially if you're like a beginner, like it's quite important for you to use a lot of references. And some of the great resources that I use is you can use Pinterest, obviously. A A lot of you artists use Pinterest, Behance, and ArtStation. You can also use Instagram and find other artists' work and use those as inspiration. And yeah, in my opinion, I definitely believe that using references is quite important. But of course, you should not trace them. But you can like collect a bunch of references that will help you design your own character. That has a lot of elements that you can use in your own character design. So yeah, I'll also quickly tell you how you can study with your references, do studies. And again, like I said earlier, it's important for you to visualize things with three-dimensional form. So whenever you like look at this character, this is like a 3-point pose of spiral. It's important like you visualize him as solid form. So like you can, just a second. Yeah. You can like break down your this drawings into basic forms like cylinder, cuboids, and cubes. So like you can imagine his head to be a sphere, but then it has extra point thing below. And then yeah, you can break down his entire body into cylinders and cuboids. The cool thing about this is like if you're successfully able to break down these characters into forms, it'll be easy for you to redraw them from a different camera view. So as you can see, I just found them using cubes and cylinders, cuboids and cylinders. And yeah, I feel like that's the best way to go about it, especially when you're starting out. Yep, let's look at this reference. So I'll quickly try to draw this guy and show you what I think about it while I'm drawing him. So I'll start off by like marking down his head, which is basically like a sphere, and then I see most of his torso as a curved cuboid. Right, and yeah, his neck comes here. It's like a really flat cylinder. And let's start drawing his arm. So as you can see, I'm just breaking down into 3D forms. And yeah, while you do these type of studies, you can also like look at specific shapes. You can like look at these specific shapes when it comes to the feet. How the it's like a tapered rectangle, right? And you can use that. And the more studies that you do, it'll help you create a visual library, and eventually you won't have to use references. And I'll just add the hat. So yeah, this is just like a quick rough breakdown of this character in 3D form. I'll do one more with this guy. Um, when I look at his torso, I can like break it down into two rectangles like this, and then something like this, and then his flesh will go over it. And now I'll like start breaking down his legs into cylinders. Even his torso will be three-dimensional, not just like 2D plane rectangles, but cuboids. Yep, this looks good. And I'll add the head. Here comes his neck. Right, you can see how I'm visualizing it. And his other leg. You can use a lot of softwares if you're using, it depends on what hardware you have. There's like Photoshop, Clip Studio Paint, Krita is free. The software I'm right now using is Procreate. If you're like just starting out, I'll recommend you to use Krita because it's not too hard to use and also it's free. I got the basic idea down. Now it's time to draw the arm. So one thing I realized about this, I realized that there's something wrong about this part. As you can see, my arm should be starting somewhere here. So I'll quickly redraw this part. A rough sketch to indicate where all the shapes will fall is also a good idea. Yeah, so as you can see, I've completely broken down this character into 3D forms, and this is how you should do studies. Some artists, like even me, like when I started out, I would like try to see all the shapes, yeah, or like just draw like this. So the problem with this is like you're just trying to see it as a two-dimensional image. You're not like visualizing it in 3D form, and it's definitely important for you to visualize it into a 3D form. That's why I'm suggesting you to work like this, breaking it down into cylinders and cubes. Yeah, good. Yeah, this is also a cool reference. I think I'll do a study of this too, just to give you an idea how you should do studies. I'll reduce the size. Yep. I like to start with the torso because then I'll I'll get the idea where to place the hands and the legs from there. Yep. So this cuboid represents the torso. Now let's start with the leg. Holding the sword. And now I'll add the head. Comes the neck. So the other arm is like going behind him, right? So you have to visualize a cylinder that is like tapering, not tapering, going behind in perspective. This is where like understanding perspective comes in handy. I quickly drew his foot, imagining how it would be. Yeah, but this is just like a rough quick drawing. And then you can, if you're drawing it digitally, you can like reduce a layer, reduce the opacity of the layer, and then start adding the details. Now, at this point, I'll like design a character from beginning to end, from scratch, and I'll talk you through the process and like what I think, what I'm like looking for, and all those things. And I'll be using this specific pose as a reference to design that character. So I'll like just create a new file. I'm using this secondary software called VisRef, where I like gathered some of my references that I'll be using for my character design. So let me open up Procreate. I'll start off by roughing in drawing the pose of the specific character, and then like build up, start adding elements. So again, first thing I see is the torso. And I'm breaking it down into this cuboid. And also, one important thing to note is that you don't always have to draw it as a perfect geometric form. You can make it organic because human beings are organic; they are not perfect geometric forms. And also, it can always be rough. You don't have to be perfect all the time. I'm just doing this arc for the shoulder. And his neck is a cylinder, comes like this. His head is basically a sphere, but then his chin will come like this. Something like this. Yeah. Adding a arms. So one interesting shape that I really like is this thing. Many artists exaggerate this sharp curve. I don't know what to call it. A bend, I guess. Yeah. You can exaggerate elements of human anatomy to bring out a unique style to your work. You can notice that his legs are actually in perspective. If you break it down, one leg ends here while this other leg ends here. And it also comes down to understanding one point, all the different types of perspective. Hmm. Yeah, something like this. Yes, other arm. I like to break down a fist into a cube sort of thing, a tapered cuboid, and then you can add fingers. It's an easy way to visualize it. Uh, cool. Now I'll like lower down the opacity and start adding finer details. Let me start off with the head. Another interesting thing you could do is like if you're using digital tools, you can create a clipping mask and turn your rough sketch into a dark blue sort of thing. So when you're drawing over it, it'll be easier to differentiate between your uh, previous layer sketch. It can also be useful to like try to remove your rough sketch and see how your character looks. So I had the idea of like having one part mechanical, something like Winter Soldier. So I'll give that a shot. Okay, I'll also give him some sort of clothing. It will start up like a collar. Yep. Sometimes it's like also fun to just remove your rougher and start playing with. I'm looking at this reference from War Machine. To hopefully like make his arm more mechanical. But I'll get back to that. You can also use certain references to show the wrinkles of the clothing. I'll be giving him a belt. And I guess I'll start adding the katana.
Yeah, let's pocket with it. Yeah.
I'll select both the layers and bring it up a bit. Okay, so this looks pretty good, and now I'll just start adding small elements of story, elements that are like make this character less symmetrical. So maybe he has a band. Armband. Yeah, this looks pretty interesting. So yeah, more or less I'm done with the character, and then all that remains is adding the colors. Mhm. And even this layer, like I usually go with a much more detailed line work. So if you think about it that way, I'd usually say this is also a rough sketch. I'd go one layer beyond this and add a bunch of more details. But yeah, for this, workshop session, I think this is enough. And I'll quickly go through the process of how I add colors. So usually I create a fill layer, which is basically a layer that I can use as a guidance to add the remaining color, which will make more sense if you're drawing this digitally. So the idea is just fill your entire character with just one single color. So I'm just using a light blue. Quickly filling it up. Because when you're drawing digitally, there's this concept called clipping mask. So the idea behind clipping mask is if you create a clipping mask below this fill layer, let me switch to a right. No matter what you do, it won't leave. It'll stay inside the fill layer. So yeah, this comes in handy because then you don't have to worry about uh, drawing outside the layer. So I see there's some spot here. Correct those. So yeah, I like this orange. So I'll use that for his shirt that he's wearing. And maybe it's too saturated. I'll reduce the saturation. And for the skin tone, yep, this looks perfect. And yeah, this part is supposed to be mechanical. So we'll add like a muted gray, like a bluish gray. And for his band, I'll maybe use a darker blue, something like this. Looks quite interesting. I'm just fixing up some spot that I missed while creating the fill layer.
Awesome.
And I feel like I'll keep this blue for his mechanical arm part. And then his katana sword. I'll make it a little more less saturated. Yeah, now that I fill the colors, I'll start adding the light and shadow. So the cool thing about digital art is that I usually use multiply layer, which, yeah, multiply. So I use multiply for shadows. I just, whatever color you add, it darkens the whole thing. And it's perfect for adding shadows. And also one more thing to keep in mind is that let's make sure the direction of our light source. Let's say it's coming from somewhere here. So most of his back will be in shadow. So this entire part, yeah, that's the accident. But yeah, this entire part will be in shadow. Parts of his head as well. And under his eye, nose, below his lips. And yeah, doing a lot of studies with lighting will also help you understand how to light your character. You can obviously also not always have to follow uh, physics. You can go with artistic liberty and have fun with the shapes of the shadows.
Something like this.
So since this armor has a shadow, it will cast a shadow on the pant. Same with the katana. It will cast a shadow.
Something like this.
And yeah. Finally, we could also add a lighting layer. So it usually when you have a warmer tone, if you use a warmer tone for the shadows, for this case I use this orange. So it's a good idea to use a lighter tone for the lighting. And similar to how I used multiply for the shadow layer, you can either use color dodge or screen if you're drawing this digitally for the lighting layer, the highlights. Yeah, I usually prefer color dodge, so I'll go with that. And I'll pick this. As you can see, it's too bright, so I'll reduce the opacity. And yeah, you can add highlights. In this part. Since it's metallic, you can also add highlights for the paint. Will make it feel more metal. And yeah, highlight for the sword. It wouldn't really have a highlight, but I'm adding it just because it kind of makes it look good. The handle of the sword. Awesome. I'll delete this one. And I quite like how this turned out. So finally, what I'll do is to finish this off, I'll like pick a random textured brush like this one. Let's see if this works. Yeah, I think this looks cool. Just random stroke. It creates somehow makes your artwork more dynamic, and it also makes it look like some sort of energy is coming off of the sword. So yeah, that is cool. And I guess finally we could also add a shadow for the person. I'm just going to use the lasso tool to, sorry, um, imagine how the shadow will go. And fill it with a color that is darker than the background. If that is not darker than the background. Yeah, this is. And yeah, that's pretty much it. This is the final design that I came up with.